A woman with a clipboard and an air of unshakable authority marched toward him, her voice a sharp command to move his boat. She was loud, she was proud, and she was absolutely certain she was in charge of this moment. What she couldn't possibly know, what she hadn't even considered, was that the man she was barking orders at owned the entire shimmering lake. And with her every word, the days for her fishing club were becoming numbered. It was just a breath past 7 in the morning when Elias Croft guided his truck into the gravel lot at Serenity Lake, nestled just beyond the town of Havenwood. The sun was still a soft promise behind the tree line, leaving the water's surface a perfect, untouched mirror of the dawn sky. Elias, a man of 47, had been dreaming of this morning for weeks. He'd spent the better part of the previous evening preparing his classic, polished aluminum fishing boat, imagining this exact moment, the profound quiet, the soul-warming peace, just him, a thermos of dark, hot coffee, and the very lake his father had first brought him to as a wide-eyed boy. He was just starting to unhitch the trailer, lost in the rhythm of the task, when the sharp, rapid crunch of approaching footsteps shattered the calm. Turning, he saw her. She was in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair and sunglasses already perched on her head, like a crown, defying the gentle morning light. In her hand, she brandished a clipboard as if it were a scepter of power, and her face was fixed with the kind of strained smile that never, ever reached her eyes. "You can't park that here," she called out, her voice slicing through the morning air. Elias blinked, the quiet moment broken. "I'm sorry." She closed the distance between them, her steps purposeful and firm. "This lot is private, for community use only. You need to move that boat, now." Elias carefully placed his wrench on the trailer hitch and rose to his full height, his movements calm and deliberate. "Morning to you, too. Do you live around here?" "I'm on the HOA board," she announced, infusing the title with a weight she clearly felt it deserved. "And I can tell you, you're not on the list of permitted lake users." Her eyes scanned him, then his boat, a quick, dismissive inventory. "This lake," she continued, "is restricted to members of the Whispering Pines Anglers Society. You are trespassing." Elias looked past her, his gaze sweeping the serene, empty edge of the lake. There was no one else, just him and the dawn. "Didn't see a sign?" he said, his voice even. "There's one posted clearly near the pavilion," she retorted flatly, a hint of accusation in her tone. "You must have missed it." Elias offered a small, slow nod. "I've fished these waters dozens of times. Never ran into an issue before." "Well," she snapped, her patience gone, tapping a pen against her clipboard with a sharp, rhythmic click, click, click. "You've got one now. Either you move your boat or I'm calling this in." Elias took a slow, deep breath, a conscious effort to keep the peace, to hold on to the calm he had come here to find. "What's your name?" "Cora Blackwood," she said, straightening her posture, as if expecting the name itself to command respect. "And you are?" "Elias Croft." She scribbled something on her clipboard, the pen scratching aggressively against the paper. "Is that boat registered in your name?" "It is," he confirmed. "Well, Elias," she said, her voice now dripping with a thick, syrupy condescension, "I'm sure you're just unaware of the rules. But you can't simply show up and dump your boat wherever you please. We've had issues before. People leaving their trash, breaking things. This area is for residents and their invited guests. Under supervision." He watched her, his expression unreadable. There was something in the way she'd said the word people, a subtle curl of her lip that settled uneasily in his gut. He felt the judgment in her gaze, the way she had looked at him and his old truck and his simple boat, and decided in an instant who he was. "I'm not breaking anything," he said, his voice still quiet, but now with an edge of steel. "I'm just trying to enjoy the water. You need to pack up and leave, immediately." A long, heavy pause hung in the air between them. Elias looked down at the gravel beneath his feet, then back out at the vast, silent lake, the water calling to him. He turned his gaze back to her, his eyes steady and clear. "Are you absolutely sure you want to push this?" She blinked, taken aback by the shift in his tone. "Excuse me?" "You might want to take a moment and double-check your information," he said evenly, his voice calm but resonant. "Because I believe you are profoundly mistaken about who actually owns this lake. Cora Blackwood actually laughed, a sound that was sharp and shrill in the morning quiet. "Is that supposed to be some kind of threat? Are you trying to intimidate me? Do you have any idea how long I've lived here?" Elias didn't so much as flinch. "Do you have any idea who purchased this lake 3 years ago? Who maintains the property? Who pays the taxes on it? Who, in fact, signed off on your little fishing club's access in the first place?" For just a fraction of a second, her mask of certainty slipped. A flicker of doubt, a shadow of uncertainty, crossed her face before it was gone, vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You're bluffing," she said, her voice a little too loud. Elias simply walked back to his trailer and clipped the line back onto his boat with a decisive click. "All right, then. You do what you feel you have to do." "Oh, I will," she shot back, her confidence returning. "You'll be hearing from the board." But Elias wasn't bluffing, and Cora Blackwood had just ignited a fire she had no idea how to quench. By 9 o'clock, Elias was exactly where he'd longed to be, out on the water, his boat drifting silently near the reeds that lined the lake's eastern edge. He cast his line with an easy, practiced motion, not in a hurry, not even particularly concerned with catching much of anything. The air was cool and the world was calm, but the peace he had sought was destined to be short-lived. A white golf cart suddenly appeared near the dock, a modern intrusion in the natural landscape. From across the water, Elias could already tell who it was. The same rigid posture, the same sharp, impatient movements, Cora Blackwood. But this time she had brought reinforcements. A man in a windbreaker with a radio clipped to his belt sat beside her, one of the HOA's contracted security guards. They stopped at the very edge of the dock, and Cora planted her feet wide, as if she were commanding a courtroom instead of a quiet patch of shoreline. "Elias Croft," she shouted, her voice echoing unnaturally across the water, "this is your final warning." Elias reeled in his line, his movements unhurried. He slowly turned his chair and offered a placid wave. "Morning again, Cora. I have contacted the sheriff's office. You are in direct violation of HOA regulations. You are to leave these premises immediately." The man beside her looked deeply uncomfortable. He leaned toward her, whispering something, but she just shook her head, cutting him off with a sharp gesture. Elias remained seated, a picture of calm, his hands folded in his lap. "That man with you?" he called out, his voice carrying easily over the water. "He got a badge or just a walkie-talkie?" Cora visibly stiffened. "You don't need to worry about him." "Well," Elias called back, a hint of amusement in his tone, "if you're going to accuse a man of trespassing on private land, you might want to make absolutely sure you're not the one who's actually trespassing first." The security guard, young, probably not even 25, finally stepped forward, his expression hesitant. "Sir, can I ask what your business is on the lake today?" Elias nodded. "You can ask. I'm fishing." "Are you a resident of the Whispering Pines community?" The guard asked. "No." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore, sir." Elias simply pulled his tackle box a little closer, making no move to get up. "You ever hear of a company called Apex Trust?" The young man paused, searching his memory. "Can't say that I have." "Figures," Elias said. "They're a private trust. They bought this land, the lake included, 3 years ago. It's owned and managed entirely by them. And I happen to be the sole trustee," Cora scoffed loudly. "And you expect us to just believe that?" Elias offered a small, unconcerned smile. "Frankly, I don't really care what you believe. The paperwork is all on file down at the Oak Ridge County Recorder's office. It's all public record. Feel free to look it up right now on your phone." The security guard glanced at Cora, then back at Elias, a look of growing uncertainty on his face. "Do you have any identification on you, sir?" "In the truck," Elias replied, "and I'll be more than happy to show it to a sheriff's deputy when they get here." "That is who you called, right?" The guard shifted his weight, his discomfort now obvious. Cora, on the other hand, simply doubled down, her voice rising with indignation. "This lake has been a part of our community for decades." She snapped. "Just because some faceless shell company buys the land doesn't mean you can just roll in here, act like you own the place, and disrupt our peace." "Ma'am," Elias said, his tone steady as a rock, "I didn't disrupt a thing. You came to me." Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "You know what? Fine, let's let the sheriff sort this out. But don't you dare expect any sympathy when they show up." Elias leaned back in his chair, already casting another line out into the glassy water, his attention shifting away from them. "Not looking for sympathy," he murmured to himself. "Just some peace and quiet." But Cora Blackwood couldn't let it go. Because this was never just about a boat. It was about control. And she was beginning to understand that she was losing it. By the time Elias packed up his gear and drove home that afternoon, the sun was high and hot in the sky. The silence inside his truck was a welcome embrace. The old leather seats creaked softly as he settled back, exhaling a long, slow breath, letting the quiet seep back into his bones. He wasn't angry, not yet. But something deep inside him had been stirred. Not bitterness, not resentment, but a quiet, rising reminder of what this lake truly meant to him and why he was there in the first place. His house was a simple 10-minute drive away, tucked just off a rural stretch of County Road 102. It was a modest, single-story home, painted a pale green with white trim that was starting to fade. The kind of house built for living in, not for showing off. His dog, Rusty, let out a single welcoming bark from the porch as Elias's truck crunched up the gravel driveway. Elias waved and gave a faint smile, but he didn't linger outside. Once inside, he kicked off his dusty boots, tossed his keys onto the hook by the door, and reached for a framed photograph on a nearby shelf. It was an old photo, the edges softened with time, a gentle crease running down the middle. In it, his father stood barefoot by the lake, holding up a fish with both hands, grinning a triumphant grin like he'd just won the lottery. A much younger Elias, no older than 10, smiled up at him, his jeans stained with grass and his teeth endearingly crooked. "Dad," he muttered under his breath. A conversation with a memory. "You'd have handled her a whole lot better than I did." He poured himself a tall glass of iced tea and sat down at his kitchen table. For a long while he didn't move. He just sat there, replaying the morning, thinking about the look on Cora Blackwood's face, the absolute unshakable certainty in her voice. He thought about the way she wrote his name down on her clipboard, as if he were just another problem to be managed, a trespasser with ill intentions. She hadn't cared to learn who he was. She hadn't asked. She had simply assumed. With a new sense of resolve, Elias stood up, walked to the filing cabinet in the hallway, and slid open the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick blue folder, neatly labeled Serenity Lake, Title and Access. He pulled it out, laid it flat on the dining room table, and flipped it open. There it was, all in black and white. The deed transfer from the previous landowners, the signatures from Apex Trust, his own name clearly listed as the sole trustee. And then he found it, the formal agreement between the HOA and the holding company granting conditional use of the lake to the community's fishing club. The agreement was renewable annually, but subject to review. A quick check of the dates confirmed his suspicion. No renewal had been filed in the last 10 months. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Guess they forgot who they were dealing with. The lake wasn't public. It never had been. The old owners had simply allowed the neighborhood access out of a sense of generosity and community spirit. Elias's own father, before he passed, had helped build that bridge of understanding. He had believed that people should be able to share in the beauty of nature as long as they treated it with respect. But after Elias inherited the trust, the same people who had once shaken his father's hand with gratitude had grown quiet, distant. There were a few polite waves here and there, but no real effort to get to know him. Except for Cora, of course. Cora had never even bothered to make eye contact. He scanned the paperwork again, and then a third time. There were no gray areas, no loopholes to exploit. The access was a courtesy, not a right, and he had every legal standing to revoke that courtesy if necessary. Still, acting on impulse wasn't his way. He wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. But this felt different. This wasn't just about one woman's breathtaking rudeness. It was about something bigger. It was about entitlement. It was about a fundamental lack of respect. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a while. "Hey, Mr. Allister," he said when a voice answered. "Yeah, I know it's been a minute. Listen, I need a favor. Can you pull up the HOA agreement file from 3 years ago?" Specifically the fishing access clause. Yeah, I've got the physical copy right here, but I want to double-check a couple of things with you. He paused, listening. No rush, but yeah, it's time I take a closer look at who's been taking advantage of what my father left behind. But as Elias hung up the phone, he had no idea just how deep the roots of entitlement in that neighborhood ran, or how loud the backlash would be when someone finally and firmly said no. It was early Monday morning when Elias stopped by the Oak Ridge County Recorder's office. He didn't technically need to be there. He had all the necessary documents securely filed at home. But something inside him knew that this time things needed to be official, clean, and absolutely bulletproof. He stood patiently at the counter, while the clerk, a woman with a kind smile, pulled up the parcel records on her computer. A few clicks of the mouse and the screen lit up with his name, the detailed property description, and a scanned official copy of the deed. Everything was there in stark black and white. The lake, the dock, the entire surrounding greenbelt, it was all his, held under the Apex Trust. There were no overlapping claims, no shared easements, and certainly no mention of community ownership. "Looks like everything's perfectly in order, sir," the clerk said with a polite smile. Elias nodded, a sense of quiet resolve settling over him. That's what I needed to see. When he got back into his truck, he took a long, deep breath. This wasn't about getting revenge. Not really. This was about restoring respect. Cora Blackwood hadn't just questioned his right to be on his own water. She had looked him in the eye and, with absolute certainty, decided he didn't belong there. And no matter how calm he had remained on the outside, her tone had made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. Back at home, Elias opened his laptop and pulled up a blank document. He began to draft a letter. It was direct, professional, and straight to the point, addressed to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association and its board members. He carefully cited the precise terms of the original access agreement, emphasizing the undeniable fact that no renewal request had been submitted for the current year. Then came the final decisive statement. Effective immediately, public access to the lake through any HOA or club channels would be suspended until further notice. There was no angry language, no veiled threats, just a clear, unambiguous revocation of access, backed by indisputable documentation. He attached scanned copies of the original contract, the property deed, and a notarized statement confirming his status as trustee. By the time he was finished, the message was airtight. He hit print, slid the letter and its supporting documents into a thick manila envelope, and drove it down to the HOA office himself. It was a beige, single-story building tucked away behind the subdivision's main gates. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for 2 other cars. He walked in and handed the envelope to the young receptionist without saying a word. "Do you want a receipt for this?" she asked, clearly caught off guard by his silent, serious demeanor. Elias looked her directly in the eye. "Just make sure Cora gets it." That evening, back home, he sat out on the porch with Rusty resting faithfully at his feet. The sun was setting, painting the tops of the trees in brilliant shades of gold and orange, casting a warm light across his lawn. For the first time in days, Elias felt a flicker of peace return. And then his phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Mr. Croft?" a man's voice said. "This is Robert Shaw. I'm the acting president of the Whispering Pines HOA board. We received your letter today." Elias remained silent, waiting. Robert continued, his voice hurried. "Look, we'd really like to discuss this. I think maybe there was a miscommunication somewhere. There's no need to escalate things." "There's nothing escalated about it," Elias replied, his voice perfectly calm. "The agreement wasn't renewed. Access was being used without permission. I've simply brought the situation back in line with the legal terms." "I understand," Robert said quickly, "but revoking access completely like this, it might not sit well with some of the residents. We've had use of that lake for years, and for years I haven't interfered," Elias said. "But after the way your board member approached me on Saturday, I think it's best we all take a pause." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Well," Robert finally said, "would you be open to a meeting?" Maybe we can find some sort of compromise." Elias took a long, slow sip of water before he responded. "Let's see how folks handle a little humility first." He hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. The letter had only just landed, and Elias had a feeling the ripples it was about to cause behind those gates were going to be significant. By Wednesday morning, the quiet war had begun. Elias couldn't even pull into the grocery store parking lot without catching stares, feeling the weight of curious or hostile eyes on him. It started with the emails, short, passive-aggressive notes from various board members, all written in that infuriatingly polite language people use when they are trying to conceal their fury. Then came the phone calls, some from block numbers, others from people in the community he hadn't spoken to in years. But what surprised him most were the whispers, the conversations that stopped when he entered a room, coming from people who had barely acknowledged his existence since the day he bought the property. At the hardware store, a man with a gray beard and oil-stained overalls approached him near the screws and fasteners aisle. "You Elias?" he asked, tilting his head with a curious expression. "I am," Elias replied cautiously. The man extended a rough, calloused hand. "Name's George Finn. I live over on Valley Crest Drive. Been here about 20 years. I heard what happened on Saturday." Elias shook his hand but remained quiet, waiting. George continued, lowering his voice slightly. "Just wanted you to know, not all of us feel the way Cora does. She's had a bad habit for years of thinking she runs this whole place." Elias gave a short, appreciative nod. "I appreciate that. Hell, she even told my wife last year that our front porch furniture didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." George laughed, a bitter sound. "Imagine that. A chair is a chair. You either sit on it or you don't." Elias finally cracked a small smile. "I'll keep that in mind." That wasn't the only encounter. At the post office, someone had left an unsigned, folded note in his P.O. box. It simply said, "She doesn't speak for everyone." At the gas station, a middle-aged woman gave him a hesitant wave, then quickly looked away when he didn't immediately wave back. People were trying to feel him out, testing the waters of this new, unexpected conflict. But not everyone was trying to play nice. That afternoon, he found a flyer slid into his mailbox. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded piece of standard paper with a bold, aggressive heading, "Local man revokes community lake access, retaliation or power grab." Elias stood on his porch reading it, slowly shaking his head. Beneath the headline was a short, slanted paragraph suggesting he was using his position as a weapon against the community, calling his actions disruptive and unnecessary. There was no name listed, no one to call or question, but it didn't take a genius to guess who was behind it. Later that evening, Elias walked Rusty down the familiar gravel path that led to the lake. He passed a couple standing near the waterline. They didn't speak, just watched him with unreadable expressions as he walked by, their fishing poles resting unused against the rocks. When he got back home, Elias sat on his porch and watched the sunset again. He wasn't looking for a fight. He hadn't started one. But it was becoming abundantly clear that the neighborhood didn't take kindly to being reminded that access to his lake was a privilege, not a guarantee. The next morning, he got another call. This time it was from a young woman named Eliza Monroe. She explained that she lived on Lilac Bend Lane and was new to the HOA board, recently voted in after a string of resignations. "I just want to apologize," she said, her voice sincere. "I wasn't there on Saturday, but I heard all about it. Cora doesn't speak for everyone, and frankly, some of us are deeply embarrassed." Elias kept his voice calm and even. "That's good to know." "There's talk of calling an emergency board meeting," Eliza continued. "Some want to try and reverse your decision. Others think we should formally reach out and try to negotiate a new agreement with you." "I'm not interested in negotiating right now," Elias replied simply. "I'm interested in respect." There was a brief hesitation on her end. "Understood," she said quietly. But Elias knew better than to think this would all end with a few polite phone calls. Some folks in Whispering Pines were not going to let this go without a scene, and he had a feeling that scene was coming fast. By Friday morning, the HOA office was buzzing, not with the cheerful energy of community planning, but with a tension so thick you could taste it. Elias's letter had made its rounds. Copies were passed hand to hand at backyard barbecues, forwarded through lengthy email chains, and whispered about on neighborhood walks. Every single member of the Anglers Club had read it by now, and absolutely nobody had a neutral opinion. Inside the HOA's modest meeting room, with its beige walls and mismatched chairs, Cora Blackwood stood at the head of the table. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She hadn't spoken yet, not officially, but everyone in the room could feel the fury radiating from her. Robert Shaw, the HOA president, sat beside her, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to ward off a headache. "We've all read the letter," he said finally, his voice low and tired. "And whether we like it or not, Mr. Croft is well within his legal rights." One of the older board members, Don Keeling, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So what? We just let him lock us out of our own lake? Treat us like a bunch of trespassers?" Cora's eyes narrowed. "He's trying to make a point. That much is obvious." "No," Eliza Monroe said firmly from the other end of the table. "He wants respect. And after what happened last weekend, I honestly don't think he's out of line for asking for it." Cora spun toward her, her expression sharp as glass. "Are you taking his side in this?" Eliza didn't flinch. "I'm not taking sides, Cora. I'm looking at the facts. The agreement expired. We failed to renew it. That is on us. But this affects the entire community." Cora snapped back. "That lake has been a part of Whispering Pines for decades. Families fish there. Kids swim there in the summer. He can't just cut everyone off because he got his feelings hurt." Robert glanced tiredly in her direction. "Cora, this didn't start because of his feelings. It started because you accused the man of trespassing on land he owns." For a moment, a stunned silence fell over the room. Meanwhile, Elias was back at the lake, standing on the dock with a clipboard of his own. He wasn't patrolling or watching for trouble. He was taking inventory. He noted the damage to the fencing, the trash left behind in the fire pit, the 2 broken benches near the shoreline, things the HOA hadn't bothered to fix in over a year, even though the expired access agreement had clearly placed that responsibility squarely on them. A truck slowed on the gravel path behind him, and the driver leaned out the window. It was George Finn again. "You sure you want to keep poking this hornet's nest?" he asked, a look of concern on his face. Elias didn't even look up from his notes. "I didn't poke anything, George. I just stopped letting people stomp through my yard without asking first." George let out a short, appreciative chuckle. That afternoon, a formal notice went out. It was posted on the HOA bulletin board, sent via a mass email, and even stuck into residents' mailboxes, tucked into plastic sleeves to keep the rain off. The message was short and unambiguous, effective immediately. All access to Serenity Lake is suspended pending a full review and renegotiation with Apex Trust. Residents are asked not to use the dock, shoreline, or common green belt areas until further notice. Violations may result in trespass enforcement. The neighborhood's reaction was swift and chaotic. A woman in her 60s stormed into the HOA office, demanding answers. Teenagers were seen arguing with their parents near the blocked trail entrance. Online neighborhood forums lit up with a firestorm of speculation, frustration, and half-baked legal theories. One popular post even claimed, without a shred of evidence, that Elias was secretly planning to sell the lake to a private developer. Later that night, as Elias sat on his porch, another visitor arrived. This time, it was Eliza Monroe. She knocked gently on the porch railing and stayed a respectful step back. "I wanted to check in," she said, "and to ask if you'd be willing to speak at the upcoming emergency meeting." He raised an eyebrow. "To say what?" "Whatever you think they need to hear," she replied earnestly. "Right now, they don't know you. They just know Cora's version of the story." Elias thought for a long, quiet moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, I'll come." But agreeing to show up was one thing. Facing a room full of his angry, entitled neighbors was going to be something else entirely. The community room at Whispering Pines filled up faster than anyone had anticipated. Folding chairs were pulled from storage closets, neighbors stood packed along the back wall, and some even spilled out onto the patio beyond the open doors. There hadn't been a turnout like this in years, not for budget talks, not for pool renovations. But on this evening, every single person wanted to hear what Elias Croft had to say. He stood near the front of the room, off to the side, wearing simple jeans and a plain button-up shirt. He held no podium, no notes, no papers. It was just him, watching calmly as the room buzzed with tense energy. Cora Blackwood sat dead center in the front row, a fortress of defiance, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw set like concrete. Behind her were faces Elias recognized, some vaguely, some not at all. Most were quiet, a few pointedly avoided looking in his direction. Robert Shaw stepped up to the front first. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I know this wasn't a scheduled meeting, but we felt it was important to address the concerns raised about lake access and the recent events." He glanced toward Elias, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Robert cleared his throat. "Elias Croft has agreed to speak to us tonight. I'd ask that we all keep things respectful." Elias stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. He let the silence settle, his eyes scanning the room, slowly meeting the gazes of his neighbors. "My father used to bring me to this lake when I was 10 years old," he began, his voice calm and clear, filling the quiet room. "Before any of these houses existed, we'd fish in the morning and cook what we caught on the shore in the afternoon. I learned how to tie my first fishing line right here, on that shore." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. A few heads tilted. People weren't listening. "I bought this lake 3 years ago through a trust created to honor his legacy. I kept the access open to the community. I asked for no fees. I set no restrictive conditions. I only expected that folks would treat the place with care." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But when someone walks up to you, demands that you leave, and threatens to call the police on you while you're standing on your own property, that's not about rules. That's about disrespect." A woman in the back of the room spoke up, her voice challenging. "She didn't know who you were?" Elias turned his steady gaze to her. She didn't ask. A profound silence fell over the room. No one tried to argue the point. Elias went on, "This isn't about punishing the community. It's about accountability. For years, you've all been using something that doesn't belong to you, without maintaining it, without bothering to renew the agreement, and, from what I've seen, without giving a single thought to the person who makes it all possible." He took a step back, making it clear he wasn't there to grandstand. "I didn't want it to come to this. But I will not apologize for asking to be treated like a person." That last sentence seemed to hit harder than anything else he'd said. A few people lowered their heads in thought. One woman whispered something to her husband. Then Cora stood up, her face a mask of indignation. "Why didn't you just come to us?" she demanded, her voice tight with anger. "Why go straight to shutting everyone out?" Elias looked her directly in the eye, his expression unwavering. "You came to me first, remember? On the dock, with a clipboard and a threat." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Slowly, she sat back down. Robert Shaw stepped forward again. "We're going to open the floor for discussion now. Please, no shouting. Let's keep it constructive." Immediately, several hands shot up. An older man in a fishing hat spoke first. "I don't care who owns what. That lake is a part of this neighborhood's life. Our kids have grown up on it," Elias replied evenly. "Then maybe the neighborhood should care enough to respect the person who's kept it open for you all this time." Another woman asked, her tone more conciliatory, "Would you consider renewing the agreement if the HOA committed to handling all maintenance and putting real guidelines in place?" Elias didn't answer right away. He could feel the shift in the room. They weren't just mad anymore. They were listening. "I'll consider it," he said finally, "but I'm not rushing into anything. Not until I know that folks understand that this isn't just a piece of land. It's personal." But even as the meeting wound down, Elias knew one thing for certain. Respect couldn't be demanded in a meeting. It had to be earned. And he had just made them all think, really think, about how little they had ever offered. The days that followed the meeting were strangely, profoundly quiet. There were no more flyers in Elias's mailbox, no more anonymous calls in the middle of the night. No teenagers were seen trying to fish behind the reeds. The same lake that had stirred up so much noise and conflict just a week ago now lay still, reflecting only the silent passage of trees and sky. Elias didn't expect an apology from Cora Blackwood, and he didn't get one. But she stepped back from the conflict. There were no more accusations, no more standoffs. Word around the neighborhood was that she had quietly resigned from the HOA board to focus on personal matters, though everyone knew the real reason. On Saturday morning, Elias returned to the dock, this time with a toolbox and a bucket of paint. Rusty trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging. The benches were still busted, and the fencing was still loose, but Elias felt no bitterness about it. He wanted to fix it, not for the neighborhood, but for himself, for his father. He was midway through replacing a rotted wooden plank when he heard soft footsteps behind him. "Need a hand?" He turned. Eliza Monroe stood there in jeans and sneakers, her sleeves rolled up. She held a bag of screws and a cordless drill. Elias nodded toward the second broken bench. "You know how to work that thing?" "I do," she grinned. "You wouldn't believe how much HOA paperwork I've fixed with this drill over the last year." He let out a low laugh and motioned for her to start. "Then be my guest." They worked in a comfortable quiet for a while, a silence punctuated only by the whir of the drill and the rhythmic tapping of Elias's hammer. Eliza didn't try to fill the space with small talk, which he appreciated. After about 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "You know, there are a lot of people in this neighborhood who genuinely want to make things right." Elias didn't look up from his work. "Takes more than good intentions." "I know," she said. "That's why I've been talking to the new board members. We're drafting a completely revised access agreement, one that includes strict maintenance duties, scheduled cleanup days, and a rotating oversight committee." He paused his hammering, then looked at her. "No more clipboards and threats?" "No more," she promised. "And if there are any violations, they'll be handled internally by us." "You won't be bothered," Elias nodded slowly. "I'll read it when it's ready." Later that afternoon, another surprise arrived. George Finn returned, this time with his teenage grandson Lucas in tow. The kid held a large trash bag in one hand and a pair of work gloves in the other. "We figured we'd help out a little," George said with a simple nod. "Might not fix everything, but it's a start." Elias didn't say much. He just handed the boy a rake and pointed toward the trail where broken glass had collected in the brush. By sundown, the dock looked new again. The benches were solid, the path was cleared of debris, and for the first time since the whole mess had started, Elias felt something shift. Not just in the space around him, but in the people too. At church the next morning, a few heads turned when Elias walked in. Some people nodded politely. One woman he'd never spoken to before leaned over from her pew and whispered, "That lake is lucky to have you." He thanked her, even though he didn't know her name. After the service, a man he didn't recognize approached him in the parking lot. He was tall and balding, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "You're Elias, right?" the man asked. "I live 2 streets down. I just wanted to say my kid caught his first fish at that lake last summer. I never got the chance to thank you for keeping it open for us." Elias didn't need the thanks, but it meant something. Not just because it was sincere, but because it came without being forced or demanded. That night, as he walked Rusty along the quiet lakeside trail, he thought back to his father again. He could almost smell the fresh-cut grass, hear the familiar sound of a fishing reel spinning, feel the sacred stillness of the early morning water. His father used to say that people don't always know the true value of something until it's nearly gone. He understood that now more than ever. But Elias also realized something deeper. Respect isn't handed out in letters or won in meetings. It's earned one plank at a time, one person at a time, one choice at a time. A week later, Elias stood alone at the edge of Serenity Lake. The air was cool, the water was still, and the sunrise was painting long, beautiful streaks of orange and pink across the surface. He hadn't brought his fishing rod this time. He didn't need it. He just stood there quietly, listening not to the birds or the breeze, but to the profound absence of noise. There was no shouting, no conflict. There was only stillness. In a plastic folder under his arm was the revised access agreement. Eliza and the new board had worked hard on it. This time, the terms were crystal clear. Scheduled maintenance days, a 3-strike rule for littering, a mandatory renewal every 12 months. No automatic carryovers, no lazy assumptions. Most importantly, every member of the HOA fishing club would now have to attend a short orientation before being allowed to use the lake. a simple reminder of the lake's history, of who owned it and of what it stood for. He hadn't done it for control. He hadn't even done it for the apology that never came. He did it because letting people walk all over something precious doesn't just damage the place. It changes how you see yourself. And Elias wasn't about to let one woman's entitlement rewrite a legacy his father had built over decades. Later that day, he returned to the neighborhood clubhouse where the new board waited for his signature. A few familiar faces were there, some friendly, some still a little unsure, but none of them hostile. As Elias signed the last page of the agreement, Eliza leaned in. "We're going to do better," she said, her voice a quiet promise. Elias nodded. "I'll hold you to that." On the way out, he passed a small group of teenagers gathered near the bulletin board. They went quiet when they saw him, unsure of what to say. Then one of them, a lanky boy with a fishing hat that was too big for his head, stepped forward. "Mr. Croft?" Elias paused. "My dad told me you fixed the dock. Said I should thank you." Elias gave a small, genuine smile. "Just take care of it." "We will," the boy said quickly, his voice earnest. "Promise." Walking back to his truck, Elias felt a tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying finally ease in his chest. It was the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning an argument, but from being understood, even if only a little. He thought again about that Saturday morning, about Cora storming up with her clipboard, about how quickly she had made up her mind about him. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't pushed back with fire. He had simply let the truth and the law speak for themselves. And in the end, that had been more than enough. The lake had taught him that sometimes the best way to earn respect isn't to demand it. It's to walk with it quietly, firmly, and let others catch up at their own pace. And maybe, just maybe, by standing perfectly still, you can make enough noise to change everything.